Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and we have today the second in our series of book reviews by David Lorimer. So welcome David. Hello David.
Thank you.
And I gather our theme today is the New Thought Movement.
It is.
And you have 4 books.
I have 4 books. I could have provided any number of books on this area, but this is something I've been interested in for just over a year. And I first listened to a CD series by a man called Earl Nightingale called Lead the Field. And then I moved on to his most famous work, which is called The Strangest Secret, which is a message that he gave to his employees 50 years ago. And it became so popular that it was the first spoken LP to sell 1 million copies.
Wow.
Which is quite extraordinary in those days,
Yes.
more than 50 years ago, 1956.
So that was when it was 78.
That's not quite, no, LPs, 33s. But it's just...
Yeah, well, LPs was... I see.
33, 78s were before,
78s,
so it was an LP. It was the first spoken word LP to sell 1 million copies.
Yeah.
So a golden disc, I think they used to call it.
Yeah.
So I became interested in this, and so I started delving back, to some of the work that was done 100 years ago. And so earlier this year, for instance, I reread Emerson's essays. Not all of them, because there's a lot of them. And I have a couple of quotations from Emerson here, which I think are interesting. Great people are those who see that spiritual is stronger than force, that thoughts rule the world. And then he also says, we live in the lap of immense intelligence, which makes us receivers of its truth and organs of its activity, which is an extraordinary, receivers of its truth and organs of its activity.
Yes.
So that captures something about the New Thought movement, that everything we see around us is actually the result of thought. We're sitting in a studio here. Somebody designed this studio. We have these cameras. Somebody designed these cameras. Where did the design start? Inside somebody's head. Same applies. My grandfather was an architect, and so he produced a lot of buildings. He produced the plans, and then he produced the reliefs. Where did that all start? In his imagination, inside his head.
Yes.
And so when you begin to look around and realize that everything we see around us is the product of thought, you then begin to realize how tremendously powerful thought is. And this is a theme that comes out in the books that I'm talking to people talking about today. So the first one is a book that came out in 1898.
So with the cover, you can hardly see anything on the cover.
You can't see the cover very well.
Yeah.
But it's called In Tune with the Infinite.
Yes.
By Ralph Waldo Trine. And this book sold 2 million copies over a 30-year period or so, which is a staggering number of books to sell in those days when you consider how the market was much smaller. So it obviously had something very important in it. And I'd just like to read a couple of sentences as an example of what he has to say. Each is building their own world. We both build from within and attract from without. Thought is the force with which we build, for thoughts are forces. Like builds like, and like attracts like. Everything is first worked out in the unseen before it is manifested in the seen, in the ideal before it's realized in the real, in the spiritual before it shows forth in the material. And what's really fascinating about this book, and it's a classic book, but in fact you can download an e-book version of it from the Cygnus Books website, for those who are interested.
And that's for free, I think.
For free,
yes,
free e-book. And so he says, well, what's the supreme fact of human life? And this is what he has to say. The great central fact in human life, in your life and in mine, is the coming into a conscious, vital realization of our oneness with infinite life, and the opening of ourselves fully to this divine inflow. And so this is a very spiritual message that's being conveyed here.
Yes, it's like you don't get the ideas unless you open yourself to something bigger than you. Is that what he's trying to say?
That's right. I mean, the divine inflow is what results in inventions. And it's what, of course, people receivers of its truth, people who are receivers of truth or ideas that can be elaborated, they they receive this intuitively, and then they work this out in their minds, and then it becomes a plan, and then it manifests as a chair or a table or whatever. But what's hugely important, I think, is this realization of our oneness with the universal mind. And that takes me on to the next book, which is the Wisdom of Thomas Troward, which you can get. This is something you can download or rather purchase off Amazon. And I'd never heard of Troward, or very little about him, a year ago. And he was a circuit judge in India, and his dates are 1834 to 1916. And when he retired, he gave himself over to the study of philosophy. And there's an influence, obviously, of Eastern philosophy here, which he must have studied that while he was out in India. And then he gave the Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science, is what he called it, in 1904, shortly after William James, who was another thinker in this area, gave his Gifford Lectures in Edinburgh in 1901, 1902. And these became very famous in their time. And again, what his points are very similar. That he starts from the oneness of human consciousness with divine consciousness. That we are that consciousness. We are different, not in kind, but in degree.
Well, we're a kind of unique expression of that consciousness.
Indeed, and this is a point that Troward explains very brilliantly, because he says there's a reciprocity between the individual and the universal, because the universal is impersonal. It's represented by laws. The individual is a particular localization, condensation, a possibility. Each of us are a possibility of the divine. And in order for particular things to happen, there needs to be particular people through whom these things can happen. So the role of the individual is crucial, and the key moment in an individual's life is when they realize this reciprocity between their own consciousness and the universal consciousness, and they can begin to work with this.
And does he feel that happens for many people?
Probably not. However, it always remains a possibility.
Yes, yes.
And so it's not. I mean, I haven't had this deep realization myself until the last year, and so it's an awful lot of time gone by before they're coming to this understanding and finding that, as the Quakers would say, it spoke to my condition.
Yes.
It's something that I've found very congenial and true.
There's also, I think, a difference between understanding and knowing about it and fully being it.
Tremendously important. I first read In Tune with the Infinite in 1984, and I'm slightly appalled at myself that I failed to understand it properly. And amusingly, I actually underlined the key passages, but it never occurred to me at the time that I should think of applying this.
Well, it's a kind of grace of God in one way, I think.
Yes.
It's kind of, you can read, you can do all the right things, and it either happens or it doesn't happen.
Yes, so with Troward, I mean, what he also describes in a number of places, which I think would interest your viewers, is a number of psychic experiences that he had, which then turned out to be true, precognitions. And so he saw a woman coming down stairs with an older woman, and then he was advertising for a governess for one of his children, and the younger woman came in for the interview in the very same. He recognised her from the dream, or this flash he'd had, in the very same clothes, and so then she took the job. And then after 6 months, he said, if I tell her this story before I really know her, she'd just think I'm mad. So after 6 months, he then says, do you know, I'd had this dream before you were appointed here, and you were coming down the stairs with an old woman. This is what she looked like. This is what she was wearing. And it was her mother, absolutely identifiable as her mother. So again, it gives this message that reality is more than it seems to be, I think. And Troward was very strong on this aspect as well. He's also very strong on biblical symbolism, and he has a symbolic reading of the New Testament and the relationship between what he calls the word or the verb and the law. So each of us, as a particular manifestation of the divine, each of us is a word or a verb. So we are the dynamic principle through which the universal is able to operate on this plane. And that's a very exciting thought, because each of us is a unique possibility and potential. So each of us has something that nobody else has. And so each of us can contribute something to the world, which no one else can contribute.
And sadly, that isn't always encouraged in our culture, is it, to be an original thinker?
No, because the forces of peer pressure and conformity are very strong. So it takes some strength of character to stand out against this.
It does, and that, I guess, is also coming from the divine consciousness, whatever we call it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So there are 5 or 6 individual books inside this particular book. Right. Yeah. Different series of lectures, and you'll find that my copy has got more underlinings in it than nearly any other book I own. And so it's a very strong recommendation, this particular book.
Okay.
Shall we move on to the third book? Is that?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, this third book is called the Master Key System.
Yes.
By Charles Haanel. And this was written around the same time, 1916. And Haanel also studied Eastern philosophy. And he was about 50 when he came up with this idea. And it was a correspondence course. And so the book is in 24 parts. And you received 1 part each week.
And this is 1 part there, or this
is
a combination of a few parts?
This particular edition is part of a scheme that I was part of called the Covenant of Timeless Wisdom, and this arrived in the first box of the Covenant of Timeless Wisdom. So it's the first time I found out about this. And interestingly, there's an internet marketer, extremely successful man called Andrew Reynolds. And he found this book in a second-hand bookshop, and when he was on his uppers, he lost his job, his marriage had broken. He's in a terrible situation, and he sat down with this book with a cup of tea at 5 o'clock one afternoon, and he finished it at 2 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And when he finished it, he was so excited to think of the possibilities for his life, having read this book, that he wrote down some absurd goals of where he might be in 5 years' time, which were completely off the charts so far as his current situation was concerned. But he achieved all of it.
So, what is the basic message of the book?
Well, the basic message of the book. I just need to say one more thing about the structure of the book, and that's in the got 24 sections. Each section has a preface. Then it has a numbered exposition of the principles about the nature of the creative mind, the nature of imagination, visualization, and the processes that we go through. And then it has a summary at the end, which is in the form of question and answer. So it's incredibly clear. This is one of the brilliant things about the book. It's very, very clearly expressed. And his basic argument is based on the same premise we've been talking about before, namely that the individual mind is a microcosm of the universal or macrocosmic mind, that the way in which we contact the universal mind is through the subconscious, and that we can give suggestions to our subconscious, which, if we really believe them, and it's very important, if we don't really believe these things, nothing will happen. If we really believe them, then the thought starts working like a seed, growing, and then as the seed attracts to itself the necessary elements for it to become real in the visible manifest world. And so he explains the process of how to work with this creative process, be in harmony with this creative process. in a very step by step, and he gives exercises. One of the exercises, for instance, is to imagine a plant growing in your imagination. Another one is to take a picture of a battleship and then work out where everything in the battleship came from and how it all goes back to a thought in somebody's mind, each individual element of the battleship. You could take anything. He just happens to take a battleship. It's the middle of World War I when it was written. And so this book, I never heard of it a year ago, but it's immensely important as one of the classic texts of the New Thought movement.
And do you feel in your own life you've utilised something from this book?
I've begun to. I think that these things are. I think that rewiring yourself from the inside, which is, in a sense, what I'm talking about here, it doesn't happen overnight, and you have to be doing exercises and things really every day in order for things to change. Because it's like we need inspiration every day, and so I read something inspirational every day in order to remain inspired. If we don't do this, then
really, so it's like a discipline you have.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's like some people might say, because often people come back from a conference and they're on a high.
Yes, yes.
And they get back home, and there's a wonderful tape I was listening to the other day, and the wife says to the husband, or the other way around, they go, say, somebody's been monkeying with your mind again. You know, you've been at one of these conferences. I'll soon bring you back down to earth. So actually what one wants to do is not come back down to earth, as it were, but to try and help your family and other people, be more inspired and therefore raise their energy level, as it were.
Yeah, it's more like you want to kind of help the other people catch the energy of the conference, even though they haven't been there.
Exactly. And this man called Ed Foreman, he's very amusing, because he says that the thing you do is you give them a CD from the conference and you say to them, do you think I ought to be listening to this? And then they listen to it. And the wife comes and said, hey, you should be listening to this. It's got some really good stuff in it. And he calls that going through the side door of your other half, as it were, as opposed to going through the front door. So if you were up front and said, well, you ought to listen to this, as opposed to, do you think I should listen to this? You get a different response, you see. So I think that's one of the things I've really learnt over the last year, that we need daily inspiration. It's no good just having it once a year or even once a month.
So we have to all find our own battleship somehow, and
we have to find something that nourishes us.
Yes,
which we can read every day.
Yeah,
so that maybe takes me to the fourth book.
Okay,
sounds like Desert Island Books, doesn't it? This one.
Well, it's a mini version. Yeah.
Now this book here is called the five major pieces of the life puzzle. By Jim Rohn.
Rohn, yeah.
R-O-H-N. Jim Rohn was a business philosopher who died last year, and he's a kind of rags to riches individual. He was brought up on a farm, but when he was 25, he found a mentor who introduced him to the importance of living your life from the inside out, rather than being determined by what happens outside.
Yes.
And so he said, "What you've got to get yourself together, because the world's not going to change. You need to change, and if you change, then your world will change. Your experiences will change. Your relationships will change." So he took this very seriously, and eventually he got people. He shared his story with a local group of people, and people were so inspired by it that they said, "Well, we'd like you to come and share it with some other people." And then so eventually he shared it with huge audiences all over the world. And one of the things I like most about Jim Rohn, he said, there are only two reasons why people change. One is inspiration and the other is desperation. And
very good, yes.
I think that's true. I think your viewers will recognise this as something that makes sense. And so this gives you a possibility, this book, of changing from inspiration, for inspirational reasons, rather than desperation. And it's divided into 5 sections. The first section is philosophy, which is what's your philosophy of life? And are you a creator in your life, or are you simply a spectator, waiting for things to happen?
Yeah, like a leader or a follower in a way,
yes,
isn't it?
and so he he explains, and he says that the most important thing is, like it says, personal philosophy is like the set of the sail. It's like the direction you're facing it. And he says, we go in the direction that we think. And so we need to work out where we actually want to go. So it's very important to be able to set some goals and move in a particular direction. So that's the first thing. The second thing is attitude. And Earl Nightingale famously said, our attitude to life determines life's attitude to us. It's not the other way around. So again, it all comes from the inside. And so the message of all of these books is that the being side of our life is the primary side. That's the most important thing. So in order to arrive at a different place in your life, you need to become different. You need to be different. You need to develop yourself. And by doing that, then other things on the outside will begin to rearrange themselves as well.
Yeah, but I think there's an important point here which really goes back to the previous three books as well. It's true that we need to be different, but in a way it's almost going back to what we really are, which we were talking about, the unique
Indeed.
expression of something bigger, and we get lost along the way and we think we're this, and it's a question of almost coming back, think, and realising we're that. And that is where the change happens somehow.
That's right, because in all cases, it's you become more by tuning into this essence where we are everything, so there's no limitations in our essence. The only limitations are in our beliefs and our expectations and our personality. So that leads into the third area, which is activity. It's all very well having the philosophy and the attitude, the emotional attitude, the intellectual framework, but without activity, it's not going anywhere. And so you need to develop a plan. So once you've got your inside wiring correct, then you need to develop an outside plan and a series of actions that move you in the direction of what you'd like to achieve. So activity is very important. And then the last two sections are results and lifestyle. And so the activity leads to results, and the results constitute effectively a lifestyle. You're able to choose certain elements of your lifestyle in accordance with the way that you work these other areas through.
Yes.
And so he's a great aphorist, Jim Rohn, and there's all sorts of things he said that are very beautifully expressed. And I gave an example of the inspiration and desperation. And so there's one other person I could mention in the same context, who your viewers, I think, might be interested in, and that is the business philosopher Brian Tracy. And what's really interesting, going back to the original theme of this, is that these are all people who understand this basic truth of as within, so without, that we are individualizations of the universal. They all understand that, and that's the point of departure, which is also what I'm trying to put across in my seminars, which I've been started to do, which are called Practical Wisdom,
yes,
and which are about connecting with your deeper purpose and applying the philosophy of success to whatever it is that you want to achieve in your life.
Yes, it's as if we all have this inherent talent, this uniqueness, and it can be quite a journey to find it. Although it's very basic, there's so many distractions, aren't there, along the way?
Yes, I think it takes me back to a course I did at university on existentialism, and there they talk about being authentic, being true to oneself, and that is tremendously important, especially for younger viewers, to get this sense of who am I really, and what are my possibilities, and how can I do something unique, which is really going to make a contribution. Because I'm very keen to encourage young people not just to think in terms of fulfilling their own desires, but in fulfilling themselves in ways that also help other people.
Yes, and I think if you truly make a contribution, you're also truly satisfying your own desires, aren't you?
I think
The
so,
two
yes.
very much go hand in hand.
Exactly what Albert Schweitzer said in relation to his idea of reverence for life. That when you dedicate yourself to others, you're dedicating yourself to the universal and you're fulfilling yourself at the same time.
And that's a big subject, and maybe that's another programme, because I know there's people that also dedicate themselves to the other, but they lose somehow their own connection. And again, they're running around trying to fix things on the outside and make people feel okay, and
Yes.
somehow in themselves they're not okay.
Well, there's a lovely quote from Tagore, who said that of a person, they were so busy trying to do good that they had no time to be good.
That's very good, yeah.
Which is a thought.
Yes. We need to finish there. Thank you for coming in. It's very inspiring talking to you, because you kind of open up a lot of possibilities, and I hope as we develop this series that will become more and more apparent, that we can give people a taster in these 25 minutes, but no more than that. And if they're interested, they need to get one or more of the books, and we'll list the books at the end of the programme.
Yes, I think there's one thing that other people also might like to have a look at, which is to have a look at the Global Information Network, globalinformationnetwork.com.
Okay.
I'm a member of this.
Yes.
And it provides a study course that people can actually do when you become a member, as kind of progressive study course of the kind of things we've been talking about.
Great. Okay, I'm also going to mention that you are the programme editor for the Scientific and Medical Network, and this is there. They do a magazine every 3 months, and this is a great source of information, because David does review many books in this. So I'm going to thank you again for coming along to talk to us here in your book series for Conscious TV, and thank viewers for watching Conscious TV.
Pleasure.
And I hope we see you again soon in this series. Goodbye.